acknowledge some of those insiders. So there's a group of folks who actually planned this event. They call themselves the working group or the working team. That represent a cross-section of folks. Jenna is from our team. But could you just stand for a minute and just get acknowledged, the folks that have kind of put this work together, the working team? And this is very representative of the Delaware way, but we have folks from the Department of Labor, Department of Education, Delaware Tech, United Way, Rodel Foundation, Workforce Investment Board, and these folks work on a weekly basis to make all this happen. And the reality is they made it happen twice, right? So there was an event that was supposed to be happening here. We got snowed out. To organize an event for 550 people twice within 6 weeks is a pretty Herculean effort, so thank you. But back to the award. There's a person who helped get this going before it was even a thing. This person was involved in actually getting the ideas on the table and actually beginning to actually help us think through how this would work. And as I know the working team was sort of thinking through who this should go to, it was an easy decision. It's our Dr. Robert Schwartz. And I'm going to ask you to come up in a minute, Bob. You can relax for a second. And I want to just take this opportunity to share 2 minutes on Bob. So there's sort of 3 layers to this. One is sort of just the immediate work of the last 3 or 4 years. And then I want to sort of talk more personally about my relationship with Bob over the last 25 years. But then really kind of get a bit more personal and share a few thoughts from his wife, who I contacted, and I hope she didn't share with you ahead of time that this was going to happen. But in the last few years, he not only kind of did the work to inform the effort by synthesizing really complex education and economic data and making a really simple case. And Mark Brainerd referred to it earlier about sort of framing all that complex work into the forgotten half. And how do we address that group? But Bob has been one of these folks that has been unbelievably accessible. From our most junior policy analyst to the governor's office, he responds in exactly the same way, which is, what can I do? And usually the answer is sure. And as one example, a case in point, is that his entire Pathways to Prosperity team is now in Arizona. And they said, when we had to reschedule, they couldn't come because they're actually planning their national conference on Monday. But we said, Bob, it'd be great to have somebody. And he said, sure, I'll be here. And what he represents for me is that he's just incredibly smart and humble and just gets the work done. It gets more personal for me in the sense that I was a grad student 25 years ago when I first met Bob at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And at that point, he was a rock star. So 25 years ago, he was a rock star. I was thinking about it, and I was sort of thinking, he's sort of like Forrest Gump. As I was thinking, we think about trying to connect business to education, and there was this famous compact between business and education called the Boston Compact that was established in 1982. Bob was the executive director of the Boston Compact. He actually wrote that compact. So for over roughly 40 years, he's been connecting business and education. There's been a large-scale standards movement that was driven by an organization called Achieve. Bob started that organization in Washington, D.C., and actually led that for a number of years. There's been some massive organizations that have sort of changed the landscape of education in this country, like Education Trust, which works on civil rights issues, or Jobs for the Future, which connects education and business. Bob was the director of educational philanthropy for the Pew Foundation, one of the largest foundations in the country. He gave them the seminal grants to start their organizations. So he has played this critical role in sort of shaping the work to this point. And what I would want to just say, the last piece around what I see in terms of his work is that he is a complex and just sort of unique person. And so I wanted to get beyond what's on Wikipedia. And by the way, the fact that he had a Wikipedia page sort of impressed me. And so I called his wife, and her name is Nancy Hoffman, and she very well could be the next recipient of this because she's been super engaged in this work. But she offered three things which I'm going to close on and ask Bob to come up on. But just so you know, and beyond sort of his amazing work to this point, is that one thing she said was, if you gave him the first two notes of any jazz song created since 1900, he could tell you you're a musician. So he's a jazz aficionado. The other thing that some of you may not realize is that he had a birthday 2 weeks ago. He turned 80. And he still plays a mean game of tennis. And I just paused on that for 1 second, which is that, as I mentioned earlier, 25 years ago when I met him, he could have retired and had an amazing career. But he's been at this because he's passionate about this work, and he always makes the time to deliver and be there for everybody who asks. The last thing that his wife offered was that she said, "Thank you for honoring a humble and honorable man." And I just couldn't agree more. So I'd like to just invite Bob to the stage. Want me to hold it?
Sure. What can I say? Can you imagine my wife outing me, telling him how old I am now? This is really scary. I thought I could get away with, continuing to work for a few more years before people treating me like a senior citizen. But it's more seriously, it's just it's just been such really an honor and a pleasure to work with the folks in this room, especially with the working group. I continue to be just enormously impressed by the quality of the work here, the fact that you guys have been able to balance, I think, a real sense of the need for urgency because we're just losing a ton of kids, but also to be doing the work in a thoughtful, deliberative fashion. And the way the Career Pathways initiative has rolled out here has just been extremely impressive. When I spoke here, I guess it was last year, I articulated the hope that the way Delaware was moving, ultimately it could be the place in the U.S. where instead of having to put people on airplanes to take them to countries outside the U.S. to see what a quality system at scale looks like, that maybe Delaware could be that place for the country. The fact that you're on target to actually be serving half of your high school kids by 2020 is really impressive because once you get to that kind of scale, it means this really is a mainstream system. It's not a system for other people's kids. You're serving a broad range of young people. This is really impressive. So I'm both humbled and surprised and honored at this gift. But as I say, you've given me a gift because you've really demonstrated that it really is possible to do system reform at scale in ways that can really serve the young people who most need to be served in this society. Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to ask the governor and Chauncey Lennon and John Schnur to come up to the stage, and we're going to transition to just sort of acknowledging some of the work that's been done nationally to help move this work forward and really just get a deeper glimpse into the state strategy around moving this work forward. Chauncey Lennon, immediately to my right, is the Managing Director and Head of Workforce Initiatives for Global Philanthropy for JPMorgan Chase. We're sort of in your house. This is the Chase Center. So thank you. John Schnur, who's coming up the stage, is Chairman and Chief Executive Officer for America Achieves and Chief Advisor to the Bloomberg Philanthropies. Our Governor, John Carney, needs no further introduction. What we're going to do, and just in terms of the flow of this, ask Chauncey to share a few words about their investments through New Skills for Youth investment over the last few years, which really helped amazingly in setting the foundation for where we are today. And then John is going to speak a little bit about the next leg of this work and a new partnership. And we're going to close with the governor to talk about how this all fits together. So, Chauncey, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Let me add my words of praise and thanks to Bob. He certainly has been an inspiration and a colleague. And there are a few people who have shaped the work we're doing, like he and Nancy have. It's an honor to be here with you today to recognize the work you've been doing in Delaware to strengthen and expand career pathways as part of our $2 million investment from New Skills for Youth. I want to take just a few minutes to talk about why what you are doing is so important to JP Morgan Chase and so valuable to families, communities, and businesses in Delaware, and indeed in the U.S. at large. I want to acknowledge Governor Carney and your leadership on this issue, but I also want to acknowledge everyone here. We don't often talk about educators, employers, administrators, policymakers as being on the front lines of social change. But that's exactly what you are. These are key issues to building a strong democracy, not just a strong economy. And it's what you do every day that is making this country more just and creating more opportunity. So I want to thank you and acknowledge that. In our recently released corporate responsibility report, JP Morgan Chase Chairman and CEO Jamie Dimon writes, as the primary engine of economic growth, the private sector has a special role to play in making sure the benefits are more widely shared. At JP Morgan Chase, we take the role we play in promoting inclusive economic growth seriously. To create change at the scale and pace needed, we are leveraging the full suite of our firm's resources and capabilities: capital, data, analytics, expertise, and relationships, and deploying them to maximize returns for our communities. That's true everywhere, but it's especially true here in Delaware, where we have over 10,000 employees. Across the globe, we're investing $350 million to arm workers with the skills they need to move up the economic ladder while strengthening the talent pipeline employers need to compete. We know the future of business and the health of all our communities are inextricably linked. Our approach begins by using data to understand the problem we are trying to solve. And when it comes to the challenges we face in helping workers develop the skills they need to have stable and secure middle-class careers, what the data shows us is that over the last 40 years, our economy has been transformed. This is not just the impact of the Great Recession, but also long-term trends such as technology and automation, globalization, and demographic shifts, not to mention only a few. Job seekers and employers, businesses and industries, students and education and training providers, government leaders and policymakers are all operating in a new world, but we have barely changed the old world, the old ways in which workers are educated and trained. If we want a more inclusive economy, if we want more inclusive economic growth, we will need to develop new strategies, policies, and programs to expand opportunity. This is true for all workers, but particularly urgent challenge for those facing the greatest disadvantages in today's labor market. At the top of the list of these new strategies is growing high-quality, high-demand career pathways. Our belief is that building the pathways and ensuring that all young people have access to them will be one of the most effective ways to create opportunity in today's labor market, where there are over 30 million good jobs that do not require a BA, but do require post-secondary training past high school. And these are exactly the kinds of jobs that quality career pathway programs provide access to. This is why we've invested $75 million in the New Skills for Youth initiative. Our initiative focused on expanding high-quality, high-demand career pathways for every student. We were lucky to be able to build off the groundbreaking work of the pioneering work of the Pathways to Prosperity initiative that Bob and Nancy led, and continue to work in tandem with them. I don't need to tell anyone in this room that the Delaware and the Delaware Pathways, the state's career readiness program, have been national leaders innovating this approach. And the good news is that other states are beginning to follow the lead of Delaware. We are seeing an unprecedented level of activity at the state level Advanced CTE recently reported that last year saw a record-breaking 241 CTE and career readiness-related legislative proposals, executive orders, and budget provisions from states across the U.S. This is a 73% increase in 1 year of activity. And in a recent poll of 150 gubernatorial candidates, the only educational issue that registered support from a majority of candidates was career and technical education, which received enthusiastic bipartisan backing. More than 60 candidates, including 40 Democrats and 24 Republicans, endorsed expanding CTE. Many states are just beginning to develop a robust approach to career pathways, but Delaware is now on the next generation of challenges, looking to ensure that all students would be able to participate in work-based learning experiences that align to career pathways. Not surprisingly, given your state's impressive track record, Delaware has already made headway on these goals in the first year of New Skills for Youth. Let me point to 3 examples that highlight the ways in which this work requires leadership and collaboration across silos. First, led by the Department of Education, Delaware expanded the statewide system of career pathways. At the beginning of next year, you'll have 19 pathways that are going to serve close to 5,000 students. Second, led by Del Tech, the state has improved connections between K-12 education institutions and local employers to instill a sense of ownership in work-based learning and pre-apprenticeship opportunities outside of the state's K-12 education agency. Again, we are just seeing huge leaps in activity. You will have almost 10% of your students being enrolled in a kind of apprenticeship program, which again, few states come anywhere close to that level. And third, led by the Department of Labor, you've worked to improve relationships among the state departments of education, labor, and health and social services to ensure that all youth, particularly students with disabilities and other barriers to employment, are able to pursue career pathways of choice and have a support network that facilitates transition beyond high school. Again, just exemplary work. As you know, Delaware has set an ambitious goal of having more than 20,000 students, 50% of students in grades 9 through 12, enrolled in career pathways that prepare them for independent occupations. It's precisely these steps forward in building a comprehensive system of career preparation that aligns with state and regional economies, in scaling and sustaining meaningful work-based learning experiences, and in integrating education and workforce development efforts and data systems that will get you to this goal. I want to end by saying, on behalf of JPMorgan Chase, that we applaud the effort and commitment as taken to reach these milestones. We look forward to our continued partnership with all of you as we continue the critical work of turning the goal of an inclusive economy into a reality. And we are excited about the next opportunities in front of you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Schnook.
Thank you, Chauncey, and thanks so much to everyone here. Chauncey has been very humble about it, but it's really one of the, maybe there's not a more significant national leader in the work of philanthropy and workforce in recent years than Chauncey. And JPMorgan Chase has been incredibly generous, including providing $2 million to Delaware and around the country. It's been done with Chauncey's leadership and expertise and looking to how to leverage JPMorgan Chase to support on-the-ground efforts in Delaware and elsewhere. So there's huge appreciation. When I have questions on these issues, people like Chauncey and Bob and the leaders in this room are people that I call. So huge thanks to Chauncey for your work and leadership. So let me do 3 things while I'm here with you for a few minutes. Number 1, I'd love to tell you why I think the work in Delaware is so important for the youth and the employers and the well-being of Delaware, but also for our country and democracy. The second part of announcing a really significant, meaningful Bloomberg Philanthropies partnership in Delaware is important, and I'll share the specifics of that, but I think it's important to start with why this is so important, because then the partnership really only derives from the first. And third, I think I'll offer some concluding thoughts briefly on just some observations about what we've seen and some opportunities and challenges for you in order to deliver on the promise that you've created here in terms of really creating pathways at large scale for youth across the state of Delaware and giving employers here the workers that you all need to succeed in the 21st century economy. So the first point, why is this so important? Chauncey alluded to this, and Governor Carney, who's been such a leader on this, will speak to this as well. And you all know it in many ways, but we are in the midst of the fastest changing economy and the fastest technology-driven change in workforce in the history of the planet. We've never seen anything like this. Economists can argue whether this or the advent of the Industrial Revolution are bigger. Some think one, some the other. but never has there been as much rapid change as there is now. And the implications of that are hitting across sectors, not just education and employment. Essentially, like, the challenge of our time is how do we hold true to the values and the aspirations that bring us together as a country, and us all here in Delaware, including how do we, in fair ways, establish the link between effort and work and fair access to opportunity and the ability to lead a dignified life and contribute to those around you and your community in a time of this massive change. And there's big institutional and systems changes needed in order to hold true to that core value. And the absence of that across history we've seen can lead to devastating results for a society. Loss of democracy, loss of peace. I think that we are in a stage where our ability to strengthen our democracy depends on this adaptation across sectors. But one of those, and one of the most important, is the work that you're doing, which, as the good jobs that are then the linchpin of translating hard work into economic opportunity, go away, and increasingly go away because of automation for those who don't have the right education and skill. The question is not just hand-wringing about that happening and technology automation wiping away jobs, which they will. The question is what do we do about it? And what do you do about it here in Delaware? And the question of how we adapt our young people from every background to have a fair shot at the skills needed for good jobs and good careers in this rapidly changing economy is now no longer just a program question. And some of you have expertise in the area of CTE for a long time, and your expertise is invaluable. But it's no longer a question of just one program. And this is now at the cutting edge, as Chauncey said, of that you are at the front lines of social change and democracy building by looking at how education and employers with public and private sector leadership can actually equip our young people with the skills needed not for today's jobs, but for tomorrow's jobs and careers. The stakes are that high for our democracy and well-being as a country. And when we look around the world, I've had the privilege and opportunity to be able to look around the world and the country to see where is the most promising work on making that shift. And there are some countries that can be learned from. In Switzerland, Bob Schwartz and Nancy Hoffman, who've been such leaders, took many of us to look at the Swiss model, including some people in this room. We look at Singapore as another. But we can't copy, we can learn from, we can't copy and don't want to copy what other countries are doing. The question is, what's an American version of doing this systemically at scale, educators and employers side by side? And nowhere in the US has someone done this. So the question now for the US is who can be among the first to create an American version of this? And when we look around the country, we see Governor Carney raising his hands and leading. And we're voting with our feet on this, so we've looked around the country and said, who has the most promise? No one's proven it yet, including Delaware, no one. But who's got the most promise in the coming several years to reach, in this case, half of the high school students in the state, but also then equip them with the skills and then the jobs and careers needed to equip them for their future? And so far at Bloomberg Philanthropies, we've made investments in only now 3 or 4, including today, places around the country that promise. And that's why today I'm so pleased to announce that Mike Bloomberg and Bloomberg Philanthropies is investing over $3 million in the Delaware Career Pathways effort to support this over the next 3 years. But the money, Mike Bloomberg's one of his favorite lines on all his annual reports is, in God we trust, all others bring data. So the money is important, and the question over time is the actual performance of what you do in order to deliver on this. But the money and the data is easy and unimportant compared to the leadership at the local level in schools, in communities, in employers, at the cutting edge of making this happen. And the opportunity you have created here and the need for the country to see your success is huge. So again, the money is relatively easy when the leadership and the opportunities in place. So what I'd close on by saying, well, I'm really pleased to share that, and it's building on the J.P. Morgan Chase investment. It's great partnering with J.P. Morgan Chase in many ways. We're going to work on there are other funders in this already. We're going to try to bring other funders to the table to support this as well. There's a real vote of confidence in Delaware. But at the local community level, a couple observations just in terms of as the country's eyes are on Delaware, looking for what you build. I would just offer a few thoughts. Number one, come back in 5 years and look at those 20,000 students now off in successful experiences, not only post-secondary jobs and careers. The quality of their experiences, the opportunities they have tangibly at scale is is the prize here. So how do we all work together to make sure that in the end is the end goal, and that we actually have data to demonstrate that in several years is going to be absolutely central. Number two, I'm so pleased there's so many employers in this room and educators who are working with employers. We have not seen this work where there aren't both educators and employers working side by side on solving this. It used to be this way, but now given the changes in the economy, the robots, the technology taking the routine jobs, now needing the applied skills to solve problems in real context, this only works with employers and educators side by side, and that doesn't just mean dollars, it means trust and signaling in order for people in both sides to say, hey, this is what we need. These are the skills competencies that employers need. This is what we need from educators. This is what we need from you employers. And building those relationships and the trust and the collaboration in very practical ways across education and employers and the community is absolutely crucial. So I'm glad to see it's here, but I would just push to step it to the next level. Governor Carney, I think, has been such a leader in this, and I'll introduce and pass the mic to him in a moment. One of the most important things you've done, I think, in your leadership as governor is you brought employers together this fall. And you said, you know what? You need a skilled workforce, but you need to step up as well. And how do we partner in this? And rarely, I think, do governors step up and engage employers the way that you have and the way that your predecessor, Governor Markell, did. So huge appreciation for the role that you're playing in this. But keeping up the employer engagement and saying, you know what, there's translation issues. We're all citizens, we're all human beings caring about the same things, but taking the time to figure out what it takes to translate, understand one another's needs, and create the partnerships and make sure there are efficient ways to work together is not easy. So keeping that up, I think, is just going to be really, really significant. And so the third thing I'd close on is for you all, and you all in the room are at the cutting edge of this, you have the expertise. There's not a problem in Delaware that can't be solved by the ideas and leadership of people in this room in Delaware. So I would just close by saying, just understand the importance of your work and your expertise, and know that brick by brick you are building a new chapter in democracy in this country, and just keep it up. Figure out what it takes for you to keep you in the work. This is a marathon, not a sprint. We need everyone in this room for the long term. Make sure you're actually building the relationship with others, including that are outside your comfort zone, your familiar circles, so this is not just an individual sport, it's a team sport. I think those of you here are really the ones who in the end can help the country see what's possible for employers, for getting qualified workers into good jobs, for students to have the opportunities they need to establish the connection between work and economic opportunity, and for the country to have really the kind of fair, socially responsible and thriving society and democracy we need. But it's on you, and we're glad to be supportive of your efforts in the coming years. So thank you very much, and I'm very thrilled now to turn it to Governor Carney. I'll say one last thing about Governor Carney. This doesn't work in states without leadership that brings the folks together. And policy is important, budget's important, but to bring the employers, the educators, the education department, the labor department, the workforce investment boards, the Delaware techs, in the end, this really works. We've seen where a governor steps up. And a continuity of leadership is important. Governor Markell played a very important role prior. Governor Carney has stepped up and built on that and is playing a central role in supporting this. And I really think that many people only think about what they can do directly. Governor Carney said, hey, how can I help support and catalyze the leadership in this state? I think that that's just essential. We wouldn't be here without a lot of people in this room, including Governor Carney, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Governor.
Wow. If I were smart, I'd probably just say thank you and sit down. But I have a lot of thank yous to make, and so I'll take a few minutes. Let me first state the obvious. This effort didn't start this year, and it didn't start last year. This effort started 4 years ago, at least here in the state of Delaware. And I was elected governor 2 years ago and learned through that whole process that this was a train moving down the track with a lot of momentum and a lot of people on board. And I was just smart enough to get on the train with all of you. And I want to thank the people on that train. I want to first thank Chauncey and JP Morgan Chase for everything they do for our state, starting with 10,000 jobs for the people here in Delaware. I want to thank the company and other employers in the room. In fact, anybody who's representing an employer, large or small, in our state, would you please rise so that we can recognize you and thank you for what you're doing and your presence here today. I knew today was going to be a good day. I had some advance notice that there might be a check. I don't see the big check up here, by the way. Usually it's not official unless there's a big check involved. I was lieutenant governor. I was the master of big checks and receiving them. But I started the day out at Brandywine Creek State Park with fourth graders from Maple Lane Elementary School in Claymont, where I grew up, and fifth graders from Carcroft Elementary School, not too far away. And we were planting trees and celebrating Arbor Day and really just having a good time. And to be able to talk to fourth and fifth graders and yuck it up with them and plant a tree, I had an inch or two of mud on my shoes leaving there, and I didn't bring my boots. Wasn't smart enough to figure that out. So I had to run and change before going to Warner Elementary School and touring the school with 5 fifth graders, 3 girls and 2 boys. And as we were touring the various classrooms and they explained everything that happened in the school and how everything worked, and afterwards I left and I knew I was coming here, and I thought, as I do every time I visit a school, and particularly schools with as diverse populations as the 3 that I just mentioned, what the most important part of my job as governor is. And it's to make sure each and every one of those children has an opportunity to be successful in the world. Every single one. And they all come from very different places and backgrounds, different families, different socioeconomic circumstances, different neighborhoods. Couldn't be more different. We're a small state, but there are lots of differences. It was especially relevant to me because these kids from Maple Lane were where I grew up. Many of them didn't look like me, though. Many of them came from different circumstances. So what's clear for me and my team that's here, Secretary Bunting, Secretary Cade, and many others, our job is to provide that opportunity. The only way we can do that is if we work to build a strong and growing economy. That's why it's great to see Rod Ward here, who's the chairman, the new chair of our Prosperity Partnership, our public-private partnership to grow Delaware's economy and make the decisions that'll enable businesses to be successful here. Because if businesses aren't successful here, we don't have an end point for those pathways. And so it's so critically important that we make those connections, that we make it possible for the education system to work for every child and our economy to work for every child and every family in our state. That's really, really hard work, especially today, given the transformation that is happening in our state. And I don't have to take you through. Symbolic of this transformation, last night I was in the old Nemours building, which at one time was filled with hundreds, maybe thousands of DuPont scientists, business folks, administrative assistants, you name it. Today, there's not one DuPont employee in that building, nor any of the buildings that surround it. Chemours, which is a spinoff of DuPont, is going to move back into the old DuPont building. There was a time when all those buildings were filled with employees of one company. You all know the transformation that's happened in our state over the last 20 or 30 years, and it's happening, as John pointed out, across our country. So our challenge, I was at a National Governors Association meeting about 3 months ago, and one of the business leaders who spoke to all the governors made a point that really just blew me away and underscores the challenge that we face. And what she said was that the children that are entering kindergarten and first grade today, when they graduate from high school and college that many years hence, More than half of the jobs don't exist today. They don't exist today. And so as we figure out ways to create pathways for the forgotten half, and I can't thank Mr. Schwartz enough for paving the way, for leading the way for Delaware, for showing us the challenge that we have ahead of us to bring opportunity for that forgotten half. If there's a place in the country can do it, it's right here in the great state of Delaware. I accept, John, your challenge and the challenge of Bloomberg Philanthropies to make Delaware a model and to make sure that 20,000 Delaware students participate in this Pathways program. And we will, and we're going to be that model, and we're going to achieve that goal because of everybody in this room. From the educators to those of you who do nonprofit work and social welfare services, to our Department of Labor, Department of Education, to the school districts and the teachers, and most importantly to the businesses who are helping us define those pathways and the end point for those pathways. I couldn't be more proud to stand up here in front of all of you as your governor. How many people were here 4 years ago for the first conference? Stand up. Those of you who were here 4 years ago, it's not even 100. Look how many other people that we've brought into the room during that time. It's just amazing. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for creating opportunity for every single child in our state. Thank you very much, and God bless.
We're going to transition. We're going to transition, and we're going to have Paul Morris and a panel of folks to talk about industry councils and sort of the implementation of the work ahead. So I'd like to give one more round of applause to the folks at the front of the stage here. And we're going to ask the folks in the next panel to join us up front here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
This typically happens when I speak, people leave, so I apologize. Good afternoon. Once again, my name is Paul Morris. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Workforce Development at Delaware Tech, and I have the privilege to lead this next session. It's really on industry councils, but I want to kind of walk us through that process and really talk about the major strategy that our team, that the Delaware Pathways team has come up with to engage employers. The title of the session is A Statewide Approach to Building Tomorrow's Workforce. And let me translate that into the reality of this session. I want to first talk briefly about the history of Delaware Pathways, and you've heard a lot about it today, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time because I think most people understand kind of how we got where we are today. But I also want to do that by answering a series of questions. So you'll see a really, really powerful PowerPoint I spent a lot of time in developing. So first, what is Delaware's plan for building a sustainable pipeline of career-ready students? So Delaware joined the Pathways to Prosperity Institute almost 5 years ago, 5 years this October. And in that process, there was a strategic and a working group committee that was formed to create a leadership and operational structure to ensure Delaware students are both college and career ready. You've also heard that said a lot. What is college and career ready? Making sure students are not one or the other, that they're actually both. A major part of the plan is to do this work by engaging employers. I don't know if I guess I'm supposed to do this. Perfect. A major part of the plan is to do this work by connecting employers, engaging employers with Delaware students. And that's not just elementary school students or middle school students or high school students or college students. It's all. It's making sure that we have a plan to connect students in a continuum from 4th, 5th, 6th grade on all the way up through post-secondary education. This is the work that we weren't really currently doing. There was some connection to employers, but not from scale perspective. So the next obvious step was to create and onboard a workforce intermediary to do this work, to lead the work, I should say. So then the next question is, what is a workforce intermediary? I told you these PowerPoints are good. The formal definition of an organization that proactively addresses workforce needs using a dual customer approach, one which considers the needs of both employers and employees. So a great example of that formal definition would be the Delaware or U.S. Department of Labor. So they're working with employees and they're working, or potential employees, and they're working with employers. To accomplish this work within Delaware Pathways, Delaware Tech was selected to perform the role of workforce intermediary for Delaware. Last May, Delaware Tech, in partnership with the Delaware Pathways leadership team, created the Office of Work-Based Learning, which is now under the leadership of our director, Chanley Kuhn. Chanley, could you stand, please? To understand the role of this office, let's next discuss what is work-based learning. So once again, you've heard some of this today, but I'll spend a few seconds on this. The formal definition, again, is a set of instructional strategies that engages employers and schools in providing learning experiences for students. Pretty vague, right? The purpose of work-based learning programs is to build student awareness of potential careers. So we have the 3 parts of the continuum: awareness, to facilitate student exploration of career opportunities, and develop immersion activities for students to gain critical workforce skills and experience. One of the major strategies to accomplish this work is the creation and convening of industry councils. So what are industry councils? A group of companies, associations, and individuals representing a common industry or industries. What are some of the intended outcomes? Well, they include informing the surrounding communities about the collective needs of that industry, things like hiring needs, partnership needs, technology needs, those type of things. To create a singular clearinghouse of information from the industry's perspective. Once again, the industry's perspective, not what we think they need, what they actually need. To develop deeper and meaningful relationships with members of the education and training communities. And to collaborate with like companies to inform the creation of future pipeline of workers. We also have many different types of individuals attending today's conference. So really the question is, who benefits from industry councils? Is it just the employers? Is it just the students? Well, the answer is no. An overarching benefit of the councils will be the opportunity to connect and network. So we've heard a lot about engaging today. Engagement should not be a new word. Those are relationships. How do we convene individuals to build these relationships moving forward to do the work that we're talking about? So for employers, the councils will help to build organizational capacity to recruit and onboard student talent. And this is often known as a talent pipeline. For educators, the councils will provide a venue to better understand the needs of employers, to inform educational training curriculum, and opportunity to connect classroom learning to real-world examples of real-world experiences for students. For students, parents, and their guardians, the councils will provide opportunities to connect with employers to learn about careers, trends, and challenges facing the industry. This information can be vital to career choice for those students by giving students real work experience. And then lastly, for community-based organizations and NGOs, the council will provide opportunities to build partnerships, to collaborate and connect with both the educational and business communities to reach their operational missions. Now that we talked about who will benefit, let's discuss the proposed structure of the councils in Delaware. So our goal is to create 6 to 8 councils over the next 4 years. The councils will be comprised of an annual meeting. I use the example a lot, and I'll probably mess this up, and Chanley's staring at me, is shareholders meeting. So if you ever own stock or you heard of a shareholders meeting where people come together annually and that particular owner tells everyone what they're doing, what the year was like, what's coming up next. That's kind of the concept here on an annual meeting. We're going to focus on networking at these annual meetings. So part of the meeting is going to be what we're going to showcase today, just a brief part of that. But the other part is going to be getting everyone in this room together and talking to the industry, meeting people, networking, exchanging cards, those type of things. Targeted information. There will be an annual report that the leadership committee of that council will put out in advance of that annual meeting. And that report will rely on some labor statistics that we already have, but connecting it to the real world needs of these companies in Delaware. And a time for questions and clarification. And once again, today we're going to do something a little different after the council kind of talks about those needs. But really, in moving forward, the goal would be to have about an hour, well, about half an hour, for the audience and the folks on the stage to actually interact and ask questions and provide answers. Each industry council will have a leadership committee. We're calling them the executive committee. So you're looking at the executive committee of the Engineering, Manufacturing, and Energy Industry Council, which will be our first council. I'll introduce them in a second. They will not only provide leadership for this council on an annual basis, they'll also convene other folks in those industries to do work in a subcommittee fashion. So an example, and in our discussions, they brought this example to me. An example could be for a subcommittee for this council, like an HR subcommittee. So in hiring in the manufacturing field specifically, when you're hiring young people, there are some obstacles that you have to overcome. So within those obstacles, their HR experts would help them kind of figure out what's the best way to bring those students on board. And then lastly, connecting all that work through an active online community. The goal was not just to have 3 or 4 people meet on a quarterly basis. The goal was to bring the entire community, the entire industry sector together to discuss and talk and inform what needs to happen to engage students. So here's the Office of Work-Based Learning's current plan. Talked about that already. For the next 4 years. As you can see, I mentioned energy, manufacturing, energy being the first council. We have we already set our next council for healthcare, and that's going to be in October. That's our target date. And then the rest of them that you see, if you look at the note at the bottom, the asterisk, it's tentative. I mean, this is our plan, but really it's going to depend on the industries. It's going to depend on the industries coming together and leaders forming and that type of work. But this is right now our tentative plan moving forward. So we will now showcase the first council, Engineering, Manufacturing, and Energy, by having the sector representatives of the executive committee report out on their own stage. Please keep in mind that this is an abbreviated version of a future council meeting. It's only going to be about 25, 30 minutes of them reporting out for their particular sector, but it's not going to be what we're going to see when we scale this moving forward. It's going to be a little bit more in depth in those annual meetings. I'll introduce each member of the executive committee, and they will share a local, regional perspective on their field, major issues, concerns facing the industry, trends in the industry, hiring needs, and workforce training related needs. Our EME Executive Committee from, starting to my right, Liza Bartle, she's retired from Agilent Technologies. Next, Brian Sabatino, President of EDIS. And then lastly, John Allen, Regional Vice President for Delmarva Power. I'm going to go ahead and start with Brian. Brian's going to report out, and then we'll go to Liza and then John. Brian, you can do it right there, yeah, if you're comfortable, sure.
I'm an engineer and oh, here we go. Good afternoon, I'm Brian Sabatino, I'm the CEO of EDIS Company. For those of you who don't know what we do for a living, we work in the built environment. We build buildings and represent engineering for buildings, roads, etc. I'm very excited to see what you all are doing. This is my first time here, and I'm especially excited to see us focus on the forgotten 50%. I say that because our industry comes from a heritage of immigrants, and my grandfather, my great-grandfather were part of that forgotten 50%. They did not receive a formal education. As engineers in practice, maybe not in education, they walked around with circles, rectangles, squares, and triangles in their pockets, and that's how they did their engineering. And somehow, through their version of workplace learning, they were able to thrive and survive and contribute to this community. But over time, we have seen in our industry that folks from that generation celebrated their success by sending their sons and daughters to more formal education, and successive generations to even more formal education. And somewhere as an industry, we seem to have lost our way and our touch with the engineering in practice. And so we are so excited to see what's going on because, ladies and gentlemen, there is an extraordinary demand for the services of engineers in the building and road industry, but there's a massive shortage of parents sending their sons and daughters to us. And we believe, because we've seen the direct results of it, that if we can begin to engage a young woman and a young man in elementary school, and then in middle school, and then in high school, in the practical experience of engineering, then it becomes on par with the things that they are being shown that are sexy. Frankly, for the data analysts in the room and those that are involved in web-based materials and social media, they seem to be attracting our engineering students away. So we're literally having to compete in this space for the attention of kids to bring them to us. But I'll tell you what, when they do come and they do experience what it's like and the dignity of seeing something physically built with their hands through engineering, we seem to get results. So thrilled to be here today, and the report from our industry is there's an extraordinary demand for the service. There's a corresponding extraordinary shortage. We believe that there's no question that in order to tighten that gap up, giving young women and young men the opportunity to engage in workplace learning at a very early age and following up with them is the way to tighten that shortage. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Lise Spartle, and I'm from Agilent Technologies, now retired. Prior to retiring, I was responsible for a manufacturing facility here, also in Singapore, and in Shanghai. So I got a great opportunity to see sort of manufacturing across the world. As we look at manufacturing today, we have about 8.5% of the workforce in the country working in manufacturing. And yet many people don't think of it as a very interesting area to go into or want their kids to go into it because they think of it as all those jobs are going overseas or they've already gone, so there aren't any jobs left, which is just not true. So if we look at what is happening in manufacturing today, we see a lot of people working in it. 8.5% of all the workforce is still in manufacturing in the U.S. And unfortunately, many of them are baby boomers who are now eligible to retire. One of my colleagues down at PPG in Dover tells me 40% of his workforce is now eligible to retire. And so we're looking for all of those people who may be able to backfill those positions and more as the manufacturing grows. But what is really important is to think about some of the things that we're challenged with, which is, you know, when you think about manufacturing in the old days, you think about assembly lines and dirty manufacturing. That's not what we have today. There's a lot of very clean manufacturing, cell-based, with continuous improvement skills needed. And more importantly, though you hear a lot about robotics replacing the simplest of jobs, there's still many, many complex jobs with skills needed, and not all of them require college educations. In fact, many of our employees have high school educations, but with additional Dell Tech type training or other training that they got on the job. So what are the skills that we look for? A couple of years ago, as we started to think about the curriculum for Pathways, and I was involved in that for the manufacturing piece, we started to talk to all the employers and say, what skills do you need? And amazingly enough, those skills were not these highly technical skills. They're all about communications, collaboration, teamwork, a lot of things that we might think of as soft skills, not necessarily the technical skills. They're all needed by the people coming out of school going to work in manufacturing. Yes, STEM skills are important, and certainly we want people to continue to work on things like math and science and so forth, because there's a lot of good knowledge that they can bring. But you know, there's other things that people can learn from playing like video games. You might not want your kids to play video games, but you know, they do learn certain troubleshooting skills. They think about what's going on down the line, further down into the future. A lot of things come from those kinds of things that you and I don't necessarily always think of as ways to build skills. So as we get further and further down the line, as John Schnurr said before, I think we're going to see things continue to change, and we're going to need people with great skills coming out of these programs, and they don't necessarily need four-year degrees. But please think about manufacturing as a very viable alternative for folks, because the industry is still here and it's growing, and as we see regulations change and tariffs go on, we may see it grow much faster than we saw in the past.
Again, my name is John Allen, Regional Vice President for Delmarva Power. For those of you that are probably sitting here saying, I know who Gary is, I know who Glenn is, but who is this guy? They actually keep me hidden in Salisbury, Maryland. So they let me out every now and then. I'm actually responsible for Kent and Sussex counties in Delaware and the eastern shore of Maryland. And we have transmission assets in Virginia that I'm responsible for as well. So I have the largest part of our footprint for Delmarva Power. But as it relates to the energy industry, and we're not just talking about Delmarva Power, we're talking about organizations like Exelon, we're talking about organizations like Chevron, we're talking about organizations like Bloom Energy, and others. So when we talk about the energy business, and whether you're in construction or manufacturing, they all need electricity. So that's where we come into play. And I would probably say that the energy industry is open for business. And that's not just related to careers with individuals that may have four-year degrees. But as has been talked about earlier today, we're also talking about students that choose not to go on to a college career and are looking at getting directly involved in the job market. So there are employment opportunities across the energy industry that with students that have the correct skill sets are able to start in the energy field with a high school education. One of the numbers that I was looking at earlier today is that related to the energy industry, the median income for individuals working in our industry is about $73,000 a year. And so when you talk about individuals being able to come out of high school, start a job in the energy industry, that they are able to establish a career. And even if their decision after joining our companies is that they want to further their education, many of our companies have education assistance programs. I know at Delmarva we were at 100%, and so we'll pay anywhere from 80 to 100% of continuing education. As it relates to the industry itself. So a person can't say, well, I want to go out and become a psychologist, but as long as it's related to the industry, we will help to pick up the tab for that continuing education. So when we talk about what are our needs, as has been shared a little bit earlier, not only by Gary, my boss, but even as has been said earlier, that at Delmarva ourselves, we probably have about 55% of our employees that can walk in the door tomorrow and say, I'm retiring in 30 days. And that includes me as well. So we're at a place where us old heads are moving out of the industry, and we have to take the time and the energy to help develop those individuals that are coming behind us. So when Paul talks about partnerships and collaboration, in the past we would sit back and wait for employees to come to us and say either you're good enough or you're not. But now we are actually partnering with educational institutions, with high schools, VOTEC schools, to absolutely identify what are the skill sets that we need in our industry to be able to help students prepare for that industry. So when you talk about pathways as it relates to energy and the energy industry, we definitely want to help to create curriculum. We want to help in mentoring students, and we want to get more engaged in the community, and particularly as it relates to communities of color, because we struggle with our hiring, and we're actively working with educational systems to help students prepare for the testing that we do. A lot of times we have problems with individuals passing the entry-level exams or testing that we have. And so we have taken on the initiative to work with community colleges and others to help prepare students for what we call the construction skills craft training. And that training or that certification can actually be utilized across all industries. And so we're doing what we can to help those students become better prepared, not only to enter into the workforce with Delmarva, but the industry as well. Paul, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. So as I said earlier, this really is a showcase. I mean, obviously it was about 15, 20 minutes, but we wanted to showcase what a typical council would look like. And just so you know, too, this group is starting their work. Typically, you'll see a council, the annual meeting, it will be a year's worth of work that's then reported out. But what I asked them to do was share a few things. And a few things I heard, and want to make sure you heard the same thing, I heard soft skills, professional skills, the need for students to be able to enter the workforce and be productive employees. And so Liza mentioned this. She definitely was part of the development of the curriculum for the manufacturing pathway, and she was being somewhat nice. We asked for feedback we asked for hard skills too. We just got soft skills. And that was really an eye-opening experience for us from the curriculum side, because on the training side, we tend to think, okay, these are the competencies that these students need to know, and we want to make sure they demonstrate those competencies. And in this case, we still did that, but we needed to make sure the soft skills were built in. And what we also heard from the employers was not teaching a soft skills course like we've done for 20, 30 years, is embedding the soft skills in the curriculum, to making sure students demonstrate through projects, through group learning, that they can actually work together. So when they get to the workforce, they're productive. So that's one thing I heard. I also heard across the board that there is needs in all three of these sectors within this council for hiring in the future, for looking at students coming out of high school, coming out of college, going right into the workforce. And not just students with bachelor's degrees or master's degrees, students with a high school diploma. And that really, if we end where we started, where we talked about the goal of having every student be college and career ready, well, students can make that choice when they graduate. They can make the choice that, you know what, I may want to get my further education in the future, but all three reported out that their companies support further education financially. So that's also important. So it's not where you start, it's where you finish. And we need to make sure students understand that, and we need to make sure that we're engaging employers that can actually tell that story. So what's next? Next steps for this group, and actually I failed to say this, Mitch McGee is a vice president for PPG, and Mitch could not be here. He's actually on the executive committee. So Mitch and these three individuals will meet over the next year, at least quarterly, but they're also going to be putting together subcommittees that will work on specific areas. So in a year's time, 10, 11 months' time, we'll meet again in a room like this, hopefully, where we have a lot of interested people that want to come and hear what they have to say, and that will then be I won't say the real council, because this was a real council, but that will be where they report out. There'll be a written report, and we'll also have a lot of active communication between now and then to get people excited.